Hi everybody. Today we're going to do a water change here on the 125. It's not going to be anything special. I'm just going to do some water change. I'm going to wipe down the glass, and my main goal is to get in there and thin out some of that water sprite that's growing across the surface. I've really managed to get a nice big parent plant, and then of course as it grows and it develops babies, it gets thicker and thicker and denser, and I get less and less light to the bottom of the tank. I'm actually having less and less plants growing on the bottom of the tank. I used to have a couple of tiger lotus in there. A lot of the temple plant that was in there has sort of faded away. I generally have issues with plants. They either take or they don't in my tanks. I don't really do anything as far as ferts or foods. I certainly don't inject any CO2 or anything. I've got very low-tech tanks. The real issues with my tanks is the lighting. Whether or not the plants on the bottom get ample light. My tanks tend to get fairly tannin stained, and that really reduces the amount of light that gets to the bottom of a tank. You wouldn't believe how much light gets reduced by just having some tannins in the water. But the chief source of the light blockage is my temple plant that my water sprite that I like to have floating. Most of my tanks have that floating in them. This tank doesn't have it floating so much as sort of anchored behind a piece of wood and between that rock and wood, and that sort of holds it and anchors it in place. And you can see the size of the parent plant is pretty extensive. I'd give it probably 3.5 to 4 feet in total width from edge to edge. And you can see where these sort of root clusters are hanging down. These are all new roots, and these are new plants that come off of here. The main root mass is right there. That's the original plant. So all these roots, even those roots you see hanging in the back, those little spindly roots back near my spray bar, that's another plant developing and growing. All of those roots are from new plants that are developing. So those are all going to get teased out. Anywhere where the branches are growing, say back into my spray bar, and they're affecting the water flow, those will come out. Of course, the water flow is such that I get very little water flow on the surface down at this end just because of the plant. It is moving and it is swirling around, and I do have a tremendous amount of circulation in this tank. I have an 850 gallon power head, and then I have a 525 gallon per hour filter, so I am moving quite a bit of water around. I'm not concerned about that. It just doesn't disturb the surface very much, and I tend to get biofilm buildup and stuff like that. Little bits of leaf and dead plant debris will tend to float and collect on the surface down at that far left end of the tank. So just going to get in there and clean it up a little bit and trim this plant back considerably. I don't know how much of this is actually going to be on video or whether I'm going to do any head cam at this point or not. I just kind of wanted to get this shot and get started. Once I'm moving, we'll see where we go from here. So this might be a simple before and after. It might not. So sit tight and we'll see where we go. Well, I've decided to go ahead and do a more serious water change today, and therefore I may as well go ahead and make a more serious video of it. The reason I'm going to do that is because I checked the pH in the tank, and it's a little higher than I was expecting it to be. The pH in this tank usually runs between 6.4 and 6.8, depending on how long it's been since I did a water change. The last water change I did was a pretty big one, and it stuck the pH around 6.8, and it's still actually sitting around 6.8. The vial to the right there is from the tank currently, and the vial to the left is my tap water. My tap water is sitting just above neutral at about 7.2. So the difference is minimal, and I can probably do a nice good 25-30% water change without much issue. The only problem I really run into with the larger water change is the water sprite that's in there begins to droop and sag, and those branches are so long that the branches will actually snap off. But I do have a way around that, and I will go ahead and get that on video for you. So let's go over and get started. Alright everybody, the way we're going to do this today is we're going to start by taking care of this filter. We're going to get it pulled out and cleaned out, new filter material put inside, and get that all put back together and ready to go. And then I'm actually going to do the water change. So I'm not going to do it all at once while everything's going on at the same time. We're going to do it step by step. So the first thing we do is we unplug it, which we've already done. I then need to pull this valve out, if you can see that. You close the valve simply by lifting this up. When you put it back in, you fold that forward and that closes the valve. So these lock it in place. These two clips actually are the ones that press it in and seal it. And I like to use these square buckets because as you pull it out, you will see it has the glass UV tube in it, and I can simply set that over here safely out of the way. It's not terrible, but it's pretty dirty. And as I've mentioned before, almost the entirety of this filter is devoted to biofiltration, and the bottom tray is where the bulk of my actual filter material goes. I do put a liner in each additional tray, but the top 3 trays are for biofiltration primarily, and then this bottom tray is where all the physical mechanical filtration goes. So that's that for what we need to do here. This will need to go get in the other room and get dumped, and we are going to go over to my workstation and we're going to repack all these and get these cleaned out. So hang on and we'll get over there and get that started in a second. This is basically going to be just dumping all of the old nasty filter material out of here and repacking it with new. I should mention, and I probably don't often enough, that I have well water that is conditioned the way I want it conditioned. I have no chlorine, I have no chloramines, I have nothing in my water that is going to kill off any kind of nitrifying bacteria. So when I'm rinsing through my biomedia, my ceramic rings and my bio balls, and I'm using my tap water to give that stuff a little rinse off, I'm always aware of reminding you not to rinse it so thoroughly that you scrub the nitrifying bacterial colonies out of it. But I should also remind you that if you do have tap water, there's a pretty good chance you have chlorine or chloramine in that water, and if you just use it the way I do right out of your tap, you're going to do a great deal of damage to those biological cultures. So keep that in mind. Don't rinse, that's why it's always recommended that you use tank water to rinse the stuff out, and I would agree with that unless you're in a situation like mine where you know that your water is safe to do that with. So this just basically gets stuffed on in here. You can do it any old way. It's nothing scientific. There's no set way of doing it. In fact, a lot of people use the polyfill material that's much more like a cotton candy or cotton wool type material, and is not in sheets like this. It's the same material. It's the same synthetic polyester, but it is not in sheets. It's just fluffy. I personally don't like it for that very reason. Oh, I've never had these pop out before, so let's see if we can get these to go back in. Alright. These don't really even need a rinse as far as I'm concerned. I can just pull these out, get these out of the way for the moment. Get this out, which does need to be replaced. Again, just give a little rinse to get all that nasty gunk out of there. And once I've got that bottom layer filled up, from then on I can simply do one sheet at a time and just put a liner of this polyfill material in here, and that's good enough. Now the bio balls are a little more of a pain in the butt because I have them loose. I don't have them in a basket or a nylon bag, but it's still simply just a matter of getting these out of the way for a minute. As long as they are free enough that the water is able to free flow through them, then they don't need a rinse. They're fine. Again, remove that nasty little liner. And then, as before, we'll put a new liner in and then just simply put the bio balls back on top of it. And remember, water flow is the key. If the water is unable to flow, it's an interesting one. If the water is unable to flow through the bio balls and it simply flows around them, then they're not really serving their purpose. So always make sure when you're looking at your biomedia, you don't want to scrub it clean, but you do want to allow enough openness through it that the water can flow through the biomedia rather than around it. And last but certainly not least are my sponges, and that does actually have a sponge in there which I allow to work as surface for biologicals as well. So in this case I will just give this whole tray just kind of a rinse out. And we'll call that good. So now it's just a matter of going back over and putting them back in reverse order. You always want to make sure you remember which side the hole is on so you get that correct. But that's that. So sit tight, we'll get back over the tank, we'll put this back together, and then we'll get started on the water change. Right, in order to save a little bit of time, I didn't bother showing you the whole process of simply putting the trays back in, but obviously you just put them back in one at a time in reverse order. I always recommend putting water back in the filter so that you don't have to pump so much and you don't have so much air bubbles moving through, etc. when you start the filter back up. But you don't want to fill it all the way up because the top is going to sink into it, and the glass tube that has to fit in there is also going to displace water. So if you fill it up too much, you will actually overflow it when you try to put it back together. I can't tell you exactly where to put it to. You'll have to just sort of work that out yourself if you have one of these SunSun 304b Canister filters. I usually fill it up until this top tray just has some water in it, and that usually works pretty well for me. So when putting it back together, you make sure you've got the light in the right corner and all of the clips are lined up properly. That's why I do it the way I do it, so I don't have to actually make any adjustments to anything. Then you want to snug it down as much as you can, and these side clips should pull it in and actually lock it when you finally got it in there correctly. And I think yeah, we're not getting in there right. There we go. And I'm still hanging up on something on this side. I'm not sure what it is. I really don't know what the problem here is. I've never had it not lock back in place before. There we go. Alright, it was just going to be cantankerous. So that's all done. Once we get that hooked back up, move it a little closer so I can reach it. Simply put that back in once it's fully in. You do that and you can just hear the water start to flow through it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to close this valve again and finish the water change with that valve closed. And the reason I do that is once the water level drops below where the surface skimmer is, if the valve is still open, allowing water to flow through, you'll actually drain water and you'll start getting air bubbles trapped in here. Now I'm going to have air bubbles in there anyway since I just did a filter change. But normally, if I was just going to do a filter change, or a water change, I shut the filter off at the plug and then open that valve, or close that valve. I open that flap and it actually closes the valve and seals it off. And then that prevents me from getting bubbles in there when I'm doing the water change. And then as soon as I'm done, I go ahead and I open that valve by closing that flap again and then turn it on and I start flowing again with no real disruption or water in the line, or I'm sorry, air bubbles in the line. I am going to have air bubbles in the line based on what we just did, but I'll deal with that later. Right now that's going to stay open, or I should say the valve is going to stay closed the flap is going to stay open, and we are going to get on with it. All right, everybody, as you probably recall, I expressed some concern about the water level dropping too low and subsequently causing these branches to sag to the point where they would break, since the central point is sort of stationary right here. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to get in here and we're going to try to get a lot of these babies and newer plants out and get this thinned out prior to the water level getting that low. And then I actually do have a trick for preventing the water level from getting too low, and we will get to that. But right now I'm going to go in here and probably very carefully, piece by piece here, take my time and work my way through this and not just sort of get in there and yank stuff out. I want to see where it makes the most sense to make a cut. And on some cases I may just want to make a cut for the sake of thinning the branches or shortening the length of the branches overall. But mostly I want to get all of these new growth out of here. Now when I start getting towards the back, I have to be a little more heavy-handed when I cut. You can kind of see on this one, see how that's a new plant starting there and all those roots are developing. But when I start getting to these more rearward and central branches, they're directly under the light, and they actually get a lot of that spirogyra green cyanobacteria growing. Oh, there's a cricket that's still in there living. He must have gotten up on top of that stuff and escaped capture from this morning. Shot a video this morning feeding some live crickets to this tank. So that was a nice little treat for everybody. Okay, I think I'm going to cut a big chunk of this branch off. It actually has many plants growing on it. And anything in here that looks sort of brown and looks like it's dying off, I can go ahead and get that out too. Again, the whole purpose here is to thin this out to allow more light to penetrate deeper into the tank, so I can actually come in here and strategically remove some of these inward facing branches. These are not actually plants, this is me just thinning out what's already in there just to allow more light to pass through. And it actually doesn't look too bad in terms of overwhelming amounts of cyanobacteria. I'm sorry, I'm so used to dealing with the cyanobacteria that's always on my mind. But you can see right here where it's sort of thick and dense, that's a lot of that green spirogyra, which is what I meant to say, not the cyanobacteria. So if I can get this out of here, that will make it a lot nicer. If I can get that cricket down there, somebody will go up and get that cricket. Those congos really love it. Those congos will make short work of crickets. I said this morning in the video that I shot that they are related to piranhas, as are all tetras, and they have razor sharp teeth. They're very small teeth, but they are like scissors, and they will shred stuff like crickets into little tiny pieces very quickly. So some of this I want to thin out a little more. I think I can take this browning sort of branch right here and remove that altogether. And this water sprite plant is a very delicate plant. If you shove it around or bend it too much, these little branches will snap very easily, and then you wind up with a less attractive plant. But it also will grow up and out of the water, and I think I want to, well, I'll leave that one on there for now. It's a nice new piece of growth. It doesn't have a lot of crud growing on it. It doesn't look all brown, and because it has nice healthy new leaves on it, it will also readily absorb light, and that will give energy to the entire plant, not just the branches, the light shining on. So I think we're going to call that about good on thinning that out. So the next thing I'm going to do is get in there and wipe the glass down, and I will show you how I'm going to do a fairly large water change, yet keep the water level from dropping too terribly low. And that's going to be a matter of putting water in the tank simultaneously as I'm taking it out of the tank, and you've got to be very, very confident of your water in order to do that. If you've got your water that's not matched up evenly enough, you could do quite a bit of shock to your animals by doing a very large water change the way I'm about to do it. So sit tight, let me get set up for that. I need to go get my hand vac, and I need to reverse the flow of water and let the water start flowing into the tank while I start bringing it out into a bucket. So let me get this taken care of, and we'll get started on that final part. All right, everybody, this is as low as I'm letting the water go, and I now have water flowing back in through that hose, and we're going to start pulling water out with this one, and I can do some vacuuming of some of the dirtier areas in here, and I can continue pulling water out while fresh water is going in. There's usually quite a bit of filth trapped under these rocks, and it does not take much to draw it out. This is definitely one of the downsides to having a lavishly decorated tank, is you just provide tons of space for mulch and all sorts of nastiness to develop and get trapped and build up in the corners. Now, as filthy as this looks, I say this all the time, and I think this might help drive the point home. You wouldn't want to see all this stuff in your tank. I know what you're thinking, as you're seeing all this nasty crud come up underneath from these nooks and crannies, but if my filter was working, you know, if I had no places, if I had a bare tank, in other words, no places for all this stuff to get trapped, where do you think all this stuff would go? It would simply go into my filter, and it would get trapped in my filter. So once again, it wouldn't actually be out of the tank, it would simply be out of sight. I wouldn't see all of the nastiness and filth that was in the tank because it would be trapped in the filter pads. But the water just keeps flowing right over top of all of that stuff, and it's still breaking down, it's still decomposing, it's still doing all the same stuff that you would think it's doing here in my tank and making it look so nasty and gross, and it's still in there. So the fact that this stuff's getting trapped in the corners of my tank might make it a little shocking when you see me do a water change, and sometimes it makes it a little unsightly if the fish will, you know, kick up out of a corner or something like that, and suddenly you see all this filth kick up and you didn't realize was in the tank in the first place. But it's not changing anything, it's not harming anything any more so than leaving your filter go. I mean, you saw the inside of what my filter looked like. For those of you out there that wait 3 months, 5 months, 7 months between canister filter changes, think about how disgusting that is on the inside of that. What you're seeing here, this little bit of filth coming out of my tank, is small potatoes compared to what would be in a filter that's been sitting in there collecting this same filth for months on end. I try to do one of these major filter cleanings like this about once a month is my goal. It probably goes to 6 weeks on occasion. You know, maybe it's gone longer than that, once or twice, who knows. But I do, you know, I try to get in there about once a month to keep them clean and keep the filters fresh and everything else. So the little bit of stuff you're seeing here might appear shocking, but really, when you get right down to it, it is not. So I'm going to stop filming here. I'm going to go ahead and do one more of these. I'll go dump this bucket out and do another one, or maybe even two. So I will spare you the film. You've got the idea. And then from here, from here we will get on and we will do the final before and after and give a look at what it looks like after I get all the tannins out. Alright, and there you go. That's quite a difference. Now, I'm guesstimating that we did roughly a 30% water change. It's hard to tell when you're putting water in and pulling it out at the same time. You're not only pulling old water out of the tank when you do that, you're pulling the new water out that's mixing in with the tank. So the more new water that goes in, the less old water you're pulling out. So even though I did 3 of those buckets full, that wasn't actually 15 gallons of the old tank water. So it's hard to say exactly how much of an exchange I did with new water, but you can see we removed a lot of those tannins. We've really clarified the water, I'll say. We cleared it up. The tannins aren't dirtiness in the water, but it is staining in the water. The tannins actually stain the water very tea colored, and we just removed a lot of that, and that's why it's so much brighter. Of course, the other big thing that we did was we removed so much of that plant that we really opened the tank up as well, and we allowed a lot more light to get through. So I was able to keep the main body intact. We were able to keep the main branches from breaking and snapping from sagging down into the low water. So I'm quite happy with the outcome of that. We still get that nice verdant look. We get all the green in there. We get that nice green tinge to the tank from the plants, but it's nice and brightly lit now. You can actually see some color on the fish. I'm more confident that my plants on the bottom are going to get the light that they need. And when we look at the Tenopoma, as long as he goes to the back edge of the tank a little more, we'll be able to see some color on him. The problem I get with this tank, and the reason we see so much in this way of silhouettes of my fish, is that the lighting is actually in the back portion of the tank rather than the forward area. And there's about 6 to 8 inches in the front of the tank where if they're up near the top, they're actually not in the light at all. They're just kind of in the darkness where the light doesn't even get to them, and we see the silhouette. They actually have to swim deep down into the tank, or like that, swim into the back of the tank, and we actually get to see their colors pop a little more when they get back there. So thanks for watching this one. I'm going to wrap that up and call that good. There was your before and your after. I hope you enjoyed. If you're not already subscribed, please go ahead and do so. That way you won't miss anything I got coming up. And I am currently working on 4 videos at once right now, so make sure you're subscribed. That way you won't miss any of them. Thanks again for watching this one, and I will see you real soon on the next one.